to Nicola Sturgeon, it's a naked power grab, while David Mundell says it'll turn out to be a power bonanza for Scotland. Currently, the First Minister, who took the unusual step of issuing a joint statement of condemnation with the Welsh First Minister, Carwyn Jones, says she couldn't recommend the Great Repeal Bill, so setting up a potentially explosive clash between the UK government and Holyrood. Well, joining me now is the Scottish Government's Minister for Brexit Negotiations, Mike Russell. Well, first of all, Mike Russell, you've written to MSPs asking for their support for the Scottish Government to be, and I quote, at the table in the UK's Brexit negotiating strategy. What precisely does that mean?
Well, it means taking part in the discussions that are ongoing, month by month, with the EU, when matters of devolved competence are being considered and matters that would affect Scotland. It's not just devolved competence, there are issues such as freedom of movement.
So just to be clear, you're asking for a seat at the table in Brussels?
Yeah, the formulation that we've used and the Welsh have used is exactly the same, a seat at the table when devolved matters are being discussed and in the room when wider issues are being discussed. It's important that that happens because it's not happening. We're going into, again and again, substantial difficulties because the UK government don't understand much about devolution and anything about the devolved administrations.
Right, but see, a lot of MSPs might say, well, look, we kind of agree with you on we need to know what's going to be devolved and what isn't, but we don't agree that the Scottish Government should be in the actual Brexit negotiations.
Well, actually, I think there's been a majority in the Parliament for that consistently, the view that the Scottish Government should be engaged.
But you want everyone behind it.
Well, and
so
it would be
Conservatives,
good if
for example,
I think this now proves, well, that's the $64,000 question. Are the Conservatives in Scotland going to stand up for Scotland, or are they going to stand up for
but hang on.
Westminster?
But Conservatives could say perfectly reasonably, look, we can see the argument why the devolution of powers from Europe needs to be discussed and sorted out. But sorry, we're not going to say that the Scottish Government should be in the Brexit negotiations. You have to already be a Scottish nationalist before you would think that.
Well, no, I don't think you do have to be. I mean, for example, the Welsh government is not full of Welsh nationalists. It's a Labour government, and they believe they should be part of it. Much academic opinion believes that there has to be, in due process, the involvement of the devolved administrations in this. We can't sit on the sidelines, and there's meant to be a structure, of course, that allows that to happen. The Joint Ministerial Committee, its terms of reference say that it should have oversight of these negotiations. Now, in actual fact, it hasn't met since February.
No.
So they're breaking their own...
There have been reports that there are bilateral discussions going on between yourselves and the government in London. Is that true?
Well, yes. I mean, I've spoken to David Davis twice since the election and met him once. I've spoken to the First Secretary, the new Deputy Prime Minister. Of course, we're trying to have discussions, but it's very hard to do when things like the Great Repeal Bill appear without any consultation, and which are not only the wrong things, but they are also things that are not workable.
But just to get the facts clear on this, were you consulted at all before the European withdrawal bill was published?
We saw it 2 weeks ago for the first time. We've been
did see it?
Yes, we've been asking to see it. It's been in existence since February. We've been asking to see it over that period of time. The normal thing for a bill of this nature would be that officials would work together over a long period of time to get it right, because it affects Scotland so much. We saw essentially the final draft and virtually nothing. In fact, I don't think anything changed between that final draft and the publication, although we asked them to take out Clause 11, which is the clause that will cause the most difficulty. And the Welsh asked them that too. But unfortunately, they refused to change.
Right. But there has also been talk that there might be bilateral discussions between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon. Is that the case?
The door is always open to discussion.
No, but I'm asking you what the British government have said to you about what they want to do.
There has been no indication that the Prime Ministers will talk. The Welsh First Minister asked for a meeting of the JMC plenary. That's the First Ministers and the Prime Minister. That hasn't been arranged. No meeting of the JMC has been arranged. But of course,
the suggestion in these reports was that the British government wanted to have bilateral negotiations, including between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon, because the problems in Northern Ireland were making it impossible to have joint ministerial committee
That's not true. I mean, this is an excuse from them that the problems in Northern Ireland are creating this difficulty. It's quite possible for the JMC to meet with the Welsh and Scottish and the UK governments. And just to make this point very, very firmly indeed, you can't abolish the JMC unilaterally, which is what the UK government is trying to do. There has to be a discussion between the parties if it's to be changed in any way. We've formally asked for a meeting of the JMC European Committee. It's not been held within the timescale required, so actually the UK government is at default on that now.
Right, but they are saying they will have these bilateral negotiations.
And they are always welcome, but they're not a substitute for formal negotiation and discussion.
But have they formally approached you?
For what?
This? To say, look, let's, instead of the JMC,
not instead of the JMC, because we could not discuss that. There would have to be a meeting of the JMC to say, are we going to move forward?
Okay. Nicola Sturgeon said the other day that as matters stand with this withdrawal bill, the Scottish Parliament, or she would not recommend that the Scottish Parliament pass a legislative consent motion. What would have to happen for you to say, yes, we will do that?
There would have to be a recognition that in all areas of devolved competence, the powers that presently exist in Europe will come back to the devolved administrations, that is to Scotland, to Wales and Northern Ireland. Then there can be a discussion about frameworks that can move forward. Without that happening, then not only is it unacceptable and it goes against devolution in its entirety, it's unworkable, because you're actually going to enter into a complete mess where up until now, and this isn't an arcane point, up until now there's a list of things that are devolved and a list of things that are reserved. In fact, the reserved ones are listed in Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act. Now, there will be areas which are neither or both, and decisions will be made by UK ministers without consulting the Scottish Parliament or the Scottish Government on matters that are actually devolved. That's unacceptable, and it would lead to chaos.
Are you saying you will not support a legislative consent motion unless there's a deal done in this, or are you saying that you want, perhaps even on the face of the bill, just a statement that this will be done?
No, there has to be a recognition that we are the people to whom these powers are devolved, so the Welsh government. Then we can discuss what common framework could take place. This is crucially important. Let me give you a specific example in agriculture. Presently, we can have an agricultural settlement in Scotland that suits the nature of Scottish agriculture, things like less favoured area payments, which are very important to Scotland, not nearly as important to England. If we have a UK framework decided on by the UK government without any opportunity for us to actually make decisions within there, then we will have a framework that doesn't work for us. That's the whole purpose of devolution. That's why we're trying to get this right.
It is generally thought that even if you don't pass a legislative consent motion on the withdrawal bill, it doesn't really have much effect. And the Supreme Court decision in the Gina Miller case rather reinforced that. Other than shouting a lot, is there really anything you can do about this?
I think that we are in a constitutional crisis, and that crisis becomes worse if this takes place. There's a very interesting piece in one of the Sunday papers by a political academic about this, comparing it to previous constitutional crises. This would be a constitutional crisis, because the Scottish Parliament would say...
But what does that mean?
Well, it essentially means that we have a situation where Scotland has said, and its Parliament has said one thing, and the UK Parliament has simply overruled it. I don't think that leads to good governance. I don't think it leads to effective governance, and it certainly doesn't lead to the type of relationship...
There's nothing much you can do about it other than complain.
I think you want to avoid that in every possible way. You can't simply blunder into this crisis. It is the wrong thing to do, but there will be outcomes if that happens, which will be very serious, because there will be areas that are inoperable. I mean, there are areas in Scottish civil law which, if they pursue this, will be inoperable.
For example?
Well, in civil law, it is entirely devolved. So the decisions are made within Scotland. There are areas within that where decisions will be made in England about things which they have no knowledge of or information of. They haven't been responsible for civil law for the last 20 years. So we will have circumstances in which decisions are being made without any knowledge of the circumstances, without even consulting the appropriate Scottish law officers.
Are you saying that, according to the bill, decisions made in civil law cases in England will be applicable?
What I'm saying is not the cases. There is an administration of civil law which is undertaken, of course, in collaboration with others. Decisions on aspects, for example, of serving papers internationally could be made, and the bill allows them to be made, by UK ministers without consulting anybody in Scotland at all.
They would say, come on, we're just trying to get something through that means that we can bring European law into UK law. Of course, we've got no intention of doing that. We'll have discussions with you. We've said we'll have discussions with you, and we'll devolve all that.
This is the wrong way to handle it. This is absolutely the wrong way to handle it. And both ourselves and the Welsh and part of the previous Northern Irish government have said so from the beginning. What you do is you have devolution. You bring the powers back. That's what happened during the referendum. They said all the powers will come back. You bring the powers back, and then you say, how can we make this work? And we've said, we will sit down and help you to make this work. But we can't do it in this way, and that bill is the wrong bill. It's badly drafted. It's not going to work. And we've told them this. Let me say, we have told them this repeatedly over a long period of time, and unfortunately, the negotiating style, and this is a problem, I think, very evident now with the 27, the negotiating style is not to listen, but just to keep putting stuff out that won't work. That's not a good negotiating style.
Do you take it in good faith that they will negotiate what powers are transferred to Scotland, or are you concerned they might use some of these so-called Henry VIII powers to decide themselves?
I can't take it in good faith because we haven't been told.
You can't take walk in good
faith. I can't take the promises that are being made by David Mundell and others because they've been made since January. We haven't had a single example of these supposed additional powers we'll get, and we still don't have a single example of where they're not going to be involved with these issues. So there's nothing in this bill, not a word in this bill, that actually helps or justifies the argument from the UK ministers. It does the opposite.
But we're out of time, but are you concerned that they could use these Henry VIII powers, as they're called, to decide what's devolved and what isn't?
Of course, and that's what they're intending to do.
All right, Mike Russell, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now by the Under-Secretary of State for Scotland and Wales, the MEP and soon-to-be Lord Sir Ian Duncan, one man with many jobs. I mean, first of all, Ian Duncan, can we just clarify what your current situation is? Are you still an MEP?
No, it's an automatic ending of my mandate. You can't be a part of what's called the European Parliament and the European Council at the same time. So it's automatic.
But so you're now a minister, but are you're not in the House of Lords?
I haven't been introduced to the House of Lords yet, but I am a member of the House of Lords. I have a writ of summons. Yeah.
Now we've got that cleared up, the substance of the issue. I mean, you've just heard Mike Russell there. Yes. They're saying they cannot possibly pass a legislative consent motion approving the so-called European withdrawal bill because nothing has been laid out about which powers will go to Scotland and which powers will be retained by London. I mean, he's got a point, hasn't he?
Well, no. What we have to do on day one is make sure that we are able to function as a country. In order to do that, we have to make sure that all of the rules and regulations that exist at present are able to enter into UK law, UK, Scottish, English and Welsh law. It has to happen on that moment. At a point thereafter, we will determine how then we should make sure they work for the best interests of each of the devolved nations. That has to be...
But what the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government are saying is there was no reason you couldn't have sat down with them and discussed which powers would be, even if you were to do this momentarily, if you like, because of the reasons you've just explained. You should have sat down and discussed with them what powers would go to Scotland and Wales, and that nothing has been done.
No, actually the first meetings were at the beginning of the year, so there was an opening of a dialogue. That was at the point at which Mike Russell and Derek Mackay flounced out of the room and said this is not good enough. So that was back in January. The key thing to remember here is that we need to establish what is going to be a common framework. When the devolved administrations were set up, the common framework was established because we were within the EU. So across a whole range of areas, from agriculture, fisheries and so on, there was a common framework. And devolution happened within that common framework. Okay. What we need to establish is what the common framework will look like now that we are exiting the EU.
Now, there have been problems with this joint ministerial committee, haven't there, because of the situation in Northern Ireland, although the Scottish Government rejects that argument. There have been these reports, which we were talking about with Mike Russell a moment ago, that the British Government wants bilateral talks with the Scottish Government, including perhaps talks between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon. Is that true?
When I was a clerk in the Scottish Parliament, there were troubles with the joint ministerial committees, and that's going back nearly 10 years. There will be bilateral discussions and there will be meetings of this particular formulation. We need both.
Including between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, that I can't comment upon. I think at the moment we're looking at a functional level, but I don't doubt there needs to be a dialogue between each of the leaders of the devolved powers and devolved nations and the Prime Minister at some point in the future. I don't doubt that. But to make the thing work, we need to have a very different approach. And that will need to be bilateral because there are certain elements which are if you like, particular to Scotland, particular to Wales, particular to Northern Ireland, and then there are occasions when there needs to be a common discussion where all have to sit together.
Are you disappointed, annoyed at the way in which the Scottish Government is treating this?
No, I'm not surprised. I am a little bit concerned, however, because I'm talking to stakeholders right now who are talking about the need for a common framework. I spent years working in fisheries. When we leave the EU, we will need to find some way of ensuring we have a common approach to the quota situation. At the moment, a number of Scottish vessels will actually fish what is in effect English quota. If we were to take the power straight back to the Scottish Parliament and it begins to do something completely different with its approach to fisheries, we would create an unlevel playing field for Scottish fishermen. We would create uncertainty and confusion. That would not be good. We need to find a common approach that works and a common framework.
When you have those discussions, bilateral discussions, are they about which powers should be devolved to Scotland and to Wales and Northern Ireland? The Scottish Government's document, which suggested either that the UK stay in the single market or there should be some special deal whereby Scotland could stay in the single market, that's been ruled out, has it?
Well, in actual fact, when I was an MEP, I had a sit down with the EFTA Secretariat, who simply said it's not workable, it is not possible. And to expend a great deal of energy on that one particular impossibility, I think would have been a futile gesture. At the moment, we need to find a manner and means of ensuring a common approach for the whole of the United Kingdom. That is the best way forward, rather than seeking to pursue aspects which do not have the prospect which we need to have. The clock is indeed ticking. Nicola
Sturgeon says that as matters stand with the withdrawal bill, she will not recommend that the Scottish Parliament recommend or pass a legislative consent motion. You've just heard Mike Russell there say that would cause a constitutional crisis. Would it?
Well, I'll tell you one thing it would cause: absolute fear and concern in every possible aspect of the industrial sector, from farmers and fishermen, producers of energy, small businesses. That's where the real concern will lie. And the First Minister will have to explain to them exactly what she's going to do instead of that, because it's not good enough simply to posture. It is not enough to do that. You need to be able to say to people who are going to be affected on the day after Brexit that there is certainty and that they'll be able to go forward and continue doing business as they do now. If you seek to move in this particular direction, you will create uncertainty. That will be bad for investment.
Right, but do you reject the idea there would be a constitutional crisis?
I think the term is overused, but I think right now we would have significant difficulties in the body politic in Scotland if there is no certainty of what laws will apply to Scotland after a particular Brexit moment. I think that would be bad, full stop. And I think people would see that coming. And I suspect at that point, there would be serious implications.
Yeah, I mean, what does that mean, though? I mean, you know, if you're saying, are you saying that unless a legislative consent motion is passed, that the laws which are currently part of European Union law and which will be transferred to the UK would not then be law in Scotland?
Well, we need to have a legislative consent motion. That has now become clear. The lawyers north and south of the border have agreed on that. We need to move forward on that basis. If indeed there is a brinksmanship which takes place where the Scottish Government determines that shall not be the case, then they are putting in jeopardy all the people who depend upon a clear message.
But again, I ask you the question I asked you a moment ago. What does that mean? Because this is gets all very technical, and people are having great difficulty, I'm sure some of our viewers, and certainly me, in understanding precisely what this means. If there is no legislative consent motion, and if at the time of Brexit, what are the why do you say there will be great uncertainty? What precisely will happen?
Well, the point is, some rules right now are dependent upon the European Union. There's no question of that. Many of those have implications, whether it be across farming or fishing, whether it be across small businesses. If those rules themselves are not enshrined into British law, then the legal framework for those things to move forward is lost. We need to have a legal framework that allows transactions and contracts and various other aspects of day-to-day business to continue.
So you think there would be problems, for example, for Scottish businesses in doing contracts in a way that wouldn't apply in England because Westminster would have adopted this European legislation?
I think there'll be problems all over. I think there'll be problems because many of these aspects need to be done at a common base. That's the point. When we're looking at how these things move forward, we are talking again about European rules coming back to the UK. At that point, they have implications for Scotland. My concern right now is for as long as we enter into a period of brinksmanship, we will have problems. And that's why, again, the door is open, the dialogues need to be had. We need to be discussing to get this solved and find a way through, because on day one, we need to make sure there's legal certainty across Scotland in every single aspect of day-to-day life.
You've just heard Mike Russell say that he is concerned, in fact he believes, that the British government will use these so-called Henry VIII powers to determine what is devolved and what isn't. Is that the case?
No.
Why not?
Because right now, where there are any elements that are about a common framework, they will need to have primary legislation, so it will have to go to Parliament. What we're talking about in this interim period is a transition period during which we determine at that point how we collectively will wish to ensure a common framework and the aspects which will not fit into a common framework.
Well, let's just end on this. So you're guaranteeing to Mike Russell that his worries are unfounded and that there is no way these special measures, these Henry VIII powers, will be used to determine what is and what is not within the power of the Scottish Parliament?
These powers will be used to determine what should be part of a common framework, replacing the common framework of the EU. And that should be done through an agreement between each of the particular powers moving forward. And there will also be elements which will go straight back to Scotland, to Wales, to Northern Ireland, because they do not fit into a necessary component of a common framework.
All right, Ian Duncan, thank you very much indeed.